Welcome back. Today we're going to do a full sketch and I'll walk you through my process from start to finish. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, I will say that I am going to be sharing a lot of techniques in this video. So keep watching. And if you want, I've added chapters in the description so you can jump to many of those techniques. Now, the first thing I'm going to be doing is starting with my perspective lines. And once I have those established, you'll see me transition into more deliberate line work. And the reason that I like to start with a light line and then move over to a darker sketch line is that it keeps my lines fluid and it helps me to easily erase any mistakes. I'm allowed to reposition my lines and move things around as I need. These are just guides that are going to turn into more detailed lines later. And also, these lines, these light lines, are just going to help me work out my proportions in a bit. So I need that flexibility to be able to shape everything and move things around. This whole process of sketching is really an iterative process. And when I'm more confident, I'm going to make a darker line like you see me doing right now. Okay, now I'm going to rough in the area right here where these thin windows will be. And in a bit, you'll see that I struggle with this. But for now, as I rough in a general shape, you might notice that the grid that I'm drawing to place these windows is wrong. But I'll come back and I'll fix that. But this leads to a very useful technique, which I'll explain in a minute. But for now, I'm going to go back through my sketch and start to refine those lines. I mentioned before that I start with light line work and I'll make my way to darker lines as I'm more confident. So that's what you'll see me do is start to darken up the lines that I'm confident with. Now, I do want to take a moment to talk about my grip. You'll notice that I am holding my pencil way back, almost at the half point or even further back at times. And this just helps me keep my pencil light, and I can add a little bit of pressure to get a darker line as needed. I will say that a common mistake when working with a pre-sketch is to rush into making dark lines and not allowing yourself time to build up those light lines into the darker lines. The process of building up your lines is a very important intermediate step before inking. So taking that time to iterate through your line work is helpful and will lead to a better final result. Okay, now I'm going to go back and attempt to correct these windows. And again, I try to eyeball it. I'm using the different elements in my scene to help me position these windows, and I'm really just guessing at the spacing at this point, which was a mistake. Once I realize this direction isn't working, I'll erase it and I'll start over. And this is where that technique comes in handy. What I'm going to do is draw an X between the two end windows, and where that X meets is going to be the exact middle point of my shape. And that will just help me draw in the additional windows. And you can see that I'll move over and finish the rest of the windows. Okay, at this point, I'm done with my sketch and I'm going to move over to the inking. I'm using a fountain pen to do my inking. And I like using a fountain pen because I can get a little bit of a variable width depending on how much pressure I put on the tip. And the other reason why I like using a fountain pen too is because the ink tends to flow very smooth and consistent, so I don't need a lot of pressure to get a good line. Now, using my base sketch, I'm going to take my time and slow down a little bit to make sure that my lines are nice and straight. You'll notice that I'll use a couple of techniques where I might lift my line or create somewhat of a dashed line to create a straighter line. I'm going to go through and start adding some texture to my fence here using some hatch lines. Now, as I move over to the windows, this is where I'm going to be using some pressure to help me get a thicker line. And the windows that are farther away in my scene are going to get a thinner line, and I'm going to start to add more pressure as I draw the windows that are coming closer to my scene. And that just helps the illusion that my windows are receding in my scene. And once I'm done with the windows, I'm going to start adding some more hatch lines, some more texture. When I want to talk about this technique, I will flip my pen and draw with the back side of my fountain pen. And what this is doing is it's enabling me to get a slightly thinner line. I noticed as I was drawing those hatch lines that those lines were way too thick for the texture that I wanted to achieve. So by flipping my pen, I can get a smaller line, and I think that texture just reads better. Now, one thing that I want to talk about I haven't mentioned before, but when I draw, I tend to like to get up and close with my drawing. I'm the type of artist who likes to lean over and really get close to my page. But when I'm filming for YouTube, it's very difficult for me to do that. I have to lean back and keep my head away from the page so I'm not blocking the camera angle. So at times it can be kind of tricky, so I'm actually learning how to draw a little bit differently, which is kind of a fun process. Okay, so as I draw in these roof tiles, this is a point where I'm actually trying to not draw in too much detail. If I draw in too much detail, I'll ruin the illusion of the separated roof tiles. So I am trying to draw in just enough suggestion of those tiles to get my point across. I'm doing that with a bunch of dots. It's a really good technique to learn how to imply detail with a minimal amount of lines rather than trying to draw everything you see. It takes a lot of practice, but over time, you start to notice that you get better at it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move over to the trees, and I want to talk about the trees for a little bit. I'm using a different technique than I've used in the past, and in this case, I'm just tracing the outline of the tree using kind of a rough, jagged line. And I'm trying to get a general idea of the shape of the tree, but then I'll go back in and use that same line to actually trace the shadows and the highlighted areas of my tree. So I'm visually looking at my tree and breaking it up into the two major values, the highlights and the shadows. So that's what all of these lines you're seeing me draw are. I'm basically giving myself an outline to color in later when I move over to shading. Now, speaking of shading, I am doing a high contrast style, so I am going to be using only one color today. The reason I like using this style is for as simple as it seems, it actually teaches you how to see and define detail with limited values. It really helps you to break down that detail into its essential components. And since I'm working with high contrast, there are parts of the scene that I know that will be in complete shadow or completely black, so I'm intentionally leaving out that detail. Okay, as I move over to my marker, I do want to point out that I am using the Copic 100 Pure Black marker. So some of the detail that goes into complete shadows, I will intentionally leave a leading area that's uncolored, so I can get the illusion of that wire kind of receding into that shadow. Now I'm going to move over and start to shade the tree here. And again, I am just adding my shadows inside of the lines that I already made. And one of the reasons why I like to use this high contrast style is that it really helps to train your eye on seeing values and where those true shadows fall. One of the ways in which I can accomplish this is that I kind of squint my eyes, and it kind of helps me see those basic light patterns without being too distracted by the detail. It really helps me to focus on those areas of high contrast so I know where to put my shadows. Now, you'll also notice that I'm using a dotting technique on the tree. That dotting technique is just going to help give me that texture and make this tree feel fuller. And that's it. That's my scene. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you already haven't, please give it a like and subscribe.